Lawson knew every beat of a South Side Chicago morning by heart. The hiss of the kettle, the subdued clatter from the red line 2 blocks over, the click of radiators waking up slow. His 8-year-old son, Miles, shuffled into the kitchen wrapped in a blanket like a superhero who forgot his cape. Saturday meant Little League and paper cups of coffee and a sun that took its time burning dew off the infield. "Blueberries or chocolate chips?" Gabe asked, flipping batter onto the griddle. Miles didn't look up from sketching a dragon on a napkin. "Both, but not touching." "Wild demands," Gabe said, dropping blueberries on the left side and chocolate chips on the right. He liked the way Miles sorted the world into columns, neat as a scorecard. On good days, Gabe could believe he'd taught him that. Rachel padded in, hair in a loose bun, a pen tucked behind her ear. She never stopped being a teacher, not even at home. She kissed Miles's head, then Gabe's shoulder, and checked her phone with a sigh that had become too familiar. "Spam?" Gabe asked. Rachel hesitated. "It's from Eden Hope Fertility." Gabe turned a pancake. He remembered that glossy clinic in River North, the way everything smelled like lemon and correction. Years ago. Before Miles. Before the house felt properly full. "They're doing an audit," Rachel said, scrolling. "Chain of custody discrepancies from that year. They're offering free genetic testing to confirm outcomes." The spatula paused mid-air. Gabe plated 2 imperfect circles, one blue-flecked, one brown-specked. He tried to keep his voice dry. "Confirm what we've been confirming every day since he learned to say, 'Dad?'" Rachel's smile was brief, apologetic. "That's what I thought too. But we should do it. For closure." Miles looked up, dragon forgotten. "Are we closing something?" "Just a boring checklist," Gabe said, ruffling his hair. "Eat before it runs away." They did the swabs at a Hyde Park clinic on a Wednesday afternoon that felt like it was never going to matter. The nurse handed Miles a sticker that said bravery, which he wore like a medal for 3 hours. Gabe forgot about the samples in less time than it took to hit his first afternoon meeting, until the envelope showed up 3 weeks later with Eden Hope's embossed logo. He opened it with his thumbnail and read "Standing at the counter," the smell of last night's coffee still hovering. Numbers, lines, summary. Then the sentence that landed like a sudden step off a curb he hadn't seen. Probability of biological relationship between minor Miles Lawson and alleged father Gabriel Lawson. 0. EO 0. Between minor and alleged mother, Rachel Lawson, 0. 0. The letter went on about internal review, about sincere regret and resources for counseling. The words were careful and sterile. They didn't belong beside the handprint art on the fridge and the crooked magnet spelling Miles's Fort Rules. Rachel touched his elbow. He turned the paper so she could see. He watched her face fold and then hold itself, the way she absorbed a parent's complaint or a principal's new policy. "I need to tell you something," she said to the wood grain of the table. "At the hospital, after he was born, a nurse made a comment that his blood type didn't match ours. She said it happens sometimes. She said not to worry. I worried anyway. And when he was 3 months old, a pediatrician raised an eyebrow and asked if we'd used any donor material we hadn't disclosed." Her hand drifted toward the letter and then back. "I didn't tell you. I told myself it was nothing. I thought if I kept it small, it would stay small." Gabe stared at the ink until it fuzzed. "How long?" he asked, not recognizing his own voice. "Have you been carrying this alone?" "Long enough that it changed me," she said. "I'm sorry." He looked toward the living room where a plastic stegosaurus lay on its side, mid-battle. He flashed on Miles at 4, face smeared with frosting, announcing he was half ninja, half scientist. He flashed on a feverish night, Miles's tiny fingers clenched in Gabe's shirt, while Gabe counted breaths until dawn. He flashed on the first time Miles called him Dad like it had always been his name. Gabe folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. "We need air," he said, though the window was already open. They went to the lake. Chicago couldn't decide between gray and silver. They sat on a bench near Promontory Point while joggers ran past in expensive sweat. Rachel cried without racking sobs like someone lowering a flag. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Gabe asked the water. Rachel's reply was small. "We do the only thing that's ever worked for us. We keep showing up for him. And for each other?" The hurt braided itself into the question, every unasked thing threading through the words. She wiped her face. "I don't know what I deserve right now. I know what he deserves. We can start there." The clinic offered to arrange a meeting with the other family. "The genetic match," the representative said on Zoom like she was reading furniture assembly instructions. Their embryo, the rep explained, had been transferred the same week as a couple named Priya and Neil Patel from Evanston. The clinic believed embryos had been mislabeled. Edenhope faced litigation. They wanted to facilitate a restorative process. "Restorative for who?" Gabe asked. "For the children," the rep replied, "and for everyone who loves them." They met the Patels in a conference room that tried too hard not to look like a lawyer's office. Plants, abstract art, bowls of caramels. Priya wore a cardigan and the tender steadiness of a kindergarten teacher. Neil had the tense politeness of a person who expected to be wrong in every room and could not afford to be. There was a photo on the table that Priya couldn't seem to stop touching. A girl of 8, with a gap-toothed grin and a complicated braid. Her name was Asha. The Patels believed Asha was biologically Gabe and Rachel's daughter. She liked dinosaurs, mac and cheese, and making PowerPoints about things she loved. Priya spoke first. "We didn't want this meeting to be adversarial. I know it's impossible not to make it personal. It is personal. It's the most personal thing in the world. We also know," she looked at the photo, "that we have a daughter because 2 embryos were mixed up in a way no one consented to. We've raised her every day of her life. We're not letting that go. But if she has biological parents out there, and if we can do this in a way that doesn't break her..." She exhaled. "We want to try." Neil cleared his throat. "We had a test done as soon as Edenhope contacted us. Asha isn't biologically ours. We understand your son isn't biologically yours." He glanced at Gabe with sympathy that felt like a borrowed coat. "No court can tell me who her father is. I am. But I can't pretend biology doesn't exist." Gabe wanted to say 100 mean things about clinics that talk about chain of custody like babies are packages. What came out was quieter. "Miles calls me Dad in the middle of the night. Biology will never outrun that. But he deserves to know where he comes from. He deserves people who love him in every direction." Priya's eyes glossed. "I would like to know him," she said. "If, and only if, it's good for him." They built a plan with too many commas, weekly supervised visits in a child psychologist's office for 6 weeks, parallel play dates at parks where both sets of parents could breathe without performing, a moratorium on labels beyond the ones the kids chose. The lawyers drafted a temporary agreement that said nothing about custody and everything about kindness. The clinic paid for the therapist and the mediation, and later made a very public apology in a press conference that helped no one sleep. Gabe rented a 1-bedroom 3 blocks north when the house got too tight with unspoken pressure. He carried his life up 2 flights in cardboard, 3 boxes of Miles's books, Pirates, Space, A Dog Detective, 2 boxes of baseball caps and the old mitt his father had oiled every spring, 1 box of guilt he could not leave in the car. Miles came the first weekend and spun in the empty living room like a satellite. "This can be our secret clubhouse," he announced. "Our very official temporary clubhouse," Gabe said, thinking of forms with deadlines. "We need a rug," Miles decided, "and a snack shelf, and a sign that says, 'No adults allowed. Except you.' That's the nicest exception anyone's ever given me." At 2:07 a.m., Miles padded out in socks and climbed into Gabe's bed without asking. He pressed his face into Gabe's chest like he was memorizing a blueprint. "Dad? I'm here. Am I still your kid? There is nothing in any universe that could stop you from being my kid. Even if someone says there was a mix-up?" "Especially then," Gabe said, and felt something inside him unclench, like a fist opening on purpose. The first time they saw Asha in person, she bounced on the balls of her feet with that pre-trust energy kids carry into rooms. The therapist's office had beanbags and a poster that assigned colors to clouds and feelings to animals. Asha wore light-up sneakers and clutched a notebook labeled Facts. She had Rachel's stubborn mouth. When she smiled, she had Gabe's smile. Miles stood next to Gabe in a red hoodie he swore was lucky. He took one step and held up a dinosaur action figure like an offering. "Want to play?" Asha looked up at Priya and Neil, who nodded. She nodded back, solemn, and took the dinosaur. "Do you like facts?" she asked. "I like arguments," Miles said thoughtfully. "But my mom says those are just facts that haven't been agreed on yet." Asha's face lit. "Do you want to see my PowerPoint on extinct giant sloths?" Miles glanced at Gabe, eyes wide with awe. "She has a PowerPoint." Priya bit back a laugh that sounded like relief. Neil sat down so fast he almost missed the beanbag. Later, in the adult chairs, the therapist recommended keeping introductions simple. "Names first," she said. "Let them take the lead. You can say, 'These are people who are part of your story.' You can say, 'We're lucky. We have more people than we expected to love.' Labels can wait." On the ride home, Miles watched brownstones stitched together with stoops and flower boxes. "Does Asha belong to us?" he asked. "Like belonging were a team you could join with a wristband." "She belongs to herself," Gabe said. "Same as you. But she's connected to us." "Like Wi-Fi?" Gabe smiled despite everything. "Exactly like that." 2 weeks later, the headline arrived, "Class Action Suit, Filed Against Edenhope." Rachel's phone flashed with reporters' numbers. Her principal gently suggested that any public comment could be misconstrued. Gabe's supervisor at the union hall told him to focus on Little League and file for leave if he needed it. At night, Gabe lay on the clubhouse sofa watching the ceiling paint hold. Anger came in gusts. It wasn't clean. It didn't aim only at the clinic. It arced at Rachel for not telling him when that nurse raised an eyebrow 8 years ago. It flicked at himself for not seeing what she had swallowed, for leaving her to carry something sharp alone. He thought of his own father, a man of few words and many gestures, who once said love was mostly carrying, and the trick was to forgive each other for the ways you carried badly. He and Rachel went to counseling on Thursdays, the kind with tissues in every corner. They learned to say "I feel" instead of "you" always. The therapist's whiteboard filled with the math of their arguments. Fear plus silence, resentment. Guilt plus control, more silence. They learned secrets aren't always malice. Sometimes they're miscalculated mercy. "I was afraid if I said it out loud it would take form," Rachel confessed, staring at her hands. "Like fog turning to ice." "I thought if I didn't say I was scared, I was being strong," Gabe replied. "Turns out fear doesn't care whether you name it." Families had opinions. Gabe's mother, a woman who baked during crises, showed up with 3 lasagnas and fierce eyes. "That boy is my grandson," she said. "Anyone who argues with me gets a second helping of my opinions." Rachel's father, an accountant with sharp elbows, offered to pay for a private investigator and backed off when Rachel told him this wasn't a crime to solve. Friends texted versions of "I'm here." Some stayed away, afraid of saying the wrong thing and saying nothing instead. The world kept doing ordinary things that felt like betrayal. The mail came. School sent home forms about field day. The first warm day unfurled across the block like good news you couldn't trust. At a school fundraiser in the gym streamers, a bake sale, the smell of cleaner Gabe saw Priya and Neil across a table of cupcakes dyed patriotic. He didn't know they'd be there. He didn't know they were considering transferring Asha to Rachel's school. He felt his throat go chalky. There is no casual way to be in the same room as the people whose child has your smile. Neil approached with his hands visible, like entering a skittish dog's yard. "They're good together," he said, nodding toward the corner where Miles and Asha were supervising a raffle box with grave competence, explaining odds to anyone who stopped. "They're good," Gabe said, softening at the sight of Asha crouched to tie a kindergartner's shoe. "How are you holding up?" "If I start talking about sleeping, I'll cry," Neil said. "So I'll say, functioning." A group of parents walked past, voices loud, curiosity unbuttoned. "Are those the families? From the story?" Heat rose behind Gabe's eyes, an impulse to shield, to pick up both kids and walk away with them under each arm. Neil heard it too. "Want to step outside?" Under the concrete awning, Neil shoved his hands in his pockets. "I keep wanting to say I'm sorry. Which is dumb, I didn't do this. But I'm sorry anyway. For what you're losing. For what you think you're losing. For all the time I spend now thinking about jeans when I used to think about hats. I have thought more about hats since becoming a father than anything else," Gabe said, and they both smiled with chapped honesty. Inside, the kids persuaded a volunteer that the fair would go faster if they implemented a better system for distributing tickets. Rachel walked over, hair frizzed, smile wary and hopeful. "Miles wants to know if you can come do voices at bedtime," she said to Gabe. "He says 2 actors are better than 1. They looked at each other like people who had once known every shortcut and were learning the long way. "Yeah," Gabe said, "I can do that." That night they read about a kid detective and a dog. Rachel did the dog voice. Gabe did the detective. Miles interrupted to supply facts about footprints. When he sagged into sleep, Rachel stood in the doorway with a mug like she needed the ritual. "We don't have to talk," she said. "We can just sit." They sat on opposite sides of the couch, a gully between them that felt narrower than a month ago. "Do you ever think about leaving Chicago?" she asked finally. "Every March," Gabe said. "Then baseball exists again, and I think maybe I can do one more winter." "Do you think we can do one more winter?" "I think we can do tonight," he said. "Tomorrow when it shows up. That's all I can promise." "Okay." It wasn't surrender. It wasn't victory. It was something like faith. The litigation crawled. A judge with weary competence appointed a guardian ad litem for the kids. She spoke to them in a small room with toys that had seen better days, and came back with notes that read like an exercise in humility. "Both children identify their daily parents as their parents," she wrote. "Both demonstrate curiosity about biological connections and express, in age-appropriate ways, a desire to keep those connections if they are warm and not weird. Both families show insight and an ability to work together when focused on the children's immediate needs. The court should incentivize collaboration." "Warm and not weird," Rachel said, reading in a courthouse hallway. "We should embroider that." In June, Asha came to Miles's game at Jackson Park. She wore a Cubs cap and a face full of intent. When Miles hit a ball out of the infield for the first time all season, she whooped so loudly people turned. She made a sign that said "Go 12" and waved it like a flag. After the game, Miles trudged over, scuffed and triumphant. "You saw that?" "I have notes about your swing," Asha said. "Will you make them into a PowerPoint?" They spent the afternoon building slides while Gabe grilled hot dogs on a borrowed Weber. Priya and Rachel sliced watermelon, trading lesson plan war stories. Neil and Gabe argued about barbecue sauce like men who had walked through fire and found the other side full of small survivable disagreements. Later, with a documentary about giant sloths humming in the background, Priya picked up a framed photo of Miles at 3. Frosting smeared, eyes joyful. "He looks like my brother in this one," she said, then flinched as if she'd said something out of turn. "He looks like Miles," Gabe said, feeling the sentence anchor. "Asha looks like Asha." And somehow, because the world is confusing, both of them also look like pieces of all of us. "My grandmother used to say, 'Love's a town where all the streets meet,'" Priya said. "What does that even mean?" Neil asked, half grinning. "It means this kitchen," she said. On settlement day, reporters clustered on the courthouse steps like geese. The judge approved a fund for counseling and education and imposed a list of safety measures on the clinic that would have comforted everyone 10 years earlier. In the hallway, the clinic's attorney approached with a neutral expression. "On behalf of Eden Hope, we want to say again how deeply—" "Please don't," Gabe said, not unkindly. "If you want to help, put money into making sure the next family gets a social worker on day 1, and make your apologies less televised." The attorney surprised him by nodding. "That's fair." He scribbled. "I'll pass that up." Summer stretched long and forgiving. They found a rhythm. Mondays and Tuesdays at Rachel's, Wednesdays and every other weekend at the clubhouse that now had a rug and a too-big sofa and a shelf labeled snacks that Miles curated with solemn responsibility. Thursdays were counseling. Fridays rotated dinner with the Patels in Evanston some weeks. Open park meetups others. The kids negotiated fruit snack economics with a constitution in pencil. One sticky August evening, a storm rolled in hard. Power blinked out on Gabe's street. He and Miles sat on the floor with flashlights and a deck of cards. After a while, Miles crawled into Gabe's lap like he was 4 again. "I heard Jacob at camp say I have 2 moms and 2 dads, Miles said. "He said that's weird." "What did you say?" "I said sometimes weird means special. Is it weird?" "It's unusual," Gabe said. "Unusual isn't bad. You have more people. More people is good when they love you right." "Warm and not weird," Miles said into Gabe's shirt. "Exactly." September brought 3rd grade. Asha started at Rachel's school. Priya and Rachel co-chaired the book fair. Neil and Gabe coached flag football even though Neil insisted cricket remained superior, and Gabe reminded him no one on their block knew the rules. They were not a family you could put in a brochure. They were a family that required paragraphs. On a Friday after too many meetings and not enough sleep, Rachel knocked on the clubhouse door. She stood on the landing, hair damp with drizzle. "Can I come up?" "Always," he said, then corrected himself because precision mattered. "You can come up tonight." She looked around at drawings on the fridge, and the ridiculous rug Miles insisted was astronaut blue. "I miss our old life," she said, "when the biggest thing we argued about was whether you put socks in the hamper." "I miss believing we were safe because we earned it," Gabe said. "Turns out safety isn't a trophy." "Turns out." She took a breath. "I'm not asking you to say yes to anything. I just need you to know I'm still here. I'm doing the work. I'm not stopping." "I know," Gabe said. "I see you. And I see you," she said, "the way you've held him. The way you've held me when I least deserve it. You deserve to be held because you're a person. Not because you never drop anything," he said, surprised by the clarity that arrived like the L. Noisy and on time. They stood in the small kitchen, turned wide by what didn't have to be said. When Rachel left, she hesitated. "One more winter?" "Let's do fall first," Gabe said. But yeah. Some nights were still bad. He woke at 3:11 with his heart galloping, the Edenhope letter ghosting across his brain. On those nights he made tea and watched the city drowse and recited small facts. Miles's laugh after a math problem. Asha's concentration face. Rachel singing along to a song she insisted she didn't like. Priya remembering everyone's coffee order. Neil's terrible puns that got worse when he was nervous. His mother's lasagna, which improved every time she decided it was perfected. In late October, on a day sharp enough to taste, they went apple picking because traditions are less about origin and more about repetition. Miles and Asha rode the hay wagon and argued about whether Cosmic Crisp was a cooler name than Honeycrisp. Gabe held a paper cup of cider that steamed like forgiveness. The kids piled apples with the serious faces of people who had assigned themselves a job. "Remind me," Neil said, bumping Gabe's shoulder with the kind of casual camaraderie neither would have believed 6 months ago. "What is the optimal pie-to-crumble ratio for impressing a crowd?" 50-50 is the diplomat's answer, Gabe said. 60-40 in favor of crumble wins hearts. "That goes on the pillow with warm and not weird," Priya said, snapping a photo 4 adults, 2 kids, an orchard full of second chances. On the drive back, Miles nodded off with a half-eaten donut in his fist. Rachel reached for Gabe's hand on the console without looking, and he let her take it. The skyline shrugged into view, familiar and new. When they pulled up to Rachel's block, Miles blinked awake. "Dad, are you staying for movie night?" "If I'm invited." "You're always invited," he murmured, already asleep again. They burned the first batch of popcorn and ate it anyway. The kids argued about which Pixar made you cry the least, and chose the one that made everyone cry. Gabe sat on the couch with Miles propped against him like an extra rib. Rachel leaned into his shoulder just enough to read as a question. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "How are my boys?" He typed, "Good, better, learning the long way." He put the phone face down. After the credits, the radiator clicked. The world did what it does. It went on. Months later, when the air remembered the trick of spring, Gabe stood with Miles at the edge of a practice field. Asha sprinted drills in light-up sneakers, daring any boy to keep up. Priya waved from the bleachers with a thermos. Neil argued with another dad about whether you could call anything a ballpark without hot dogs. Rachel came up beside Gabe, hands stuffed in her jacket. "I'm applying for the assistant principal job," she said, voice steady. "I want you to hear it from me first, not the teacher group chat." "I'm proud of you," he said, and watched the truth of it surprise her. "You are?" Her smile was small and private. "I thought you might think I'm running away into work." "You're running forward," he said. "Different verb." She bumped his shoulder. "One more spring?" "One more," he agreed. And then one more. The winter they were bracing for arrived like it had a personal grudge. Lake Michigan threw fists of wind at the city. The clubhouse's old windows whistled. Gabe taped plastic over the worst draft and kept the kettle going. Miles turned 9 and requested a science museum party that ended with him petitioning a docent to let him sleep under the dinosaur skeleton. Asha made a slideshow titled "Why Sleepovers in Museums Should Be a Thing," complete with budget line items. Rachel's assistant principal interview landed on the coldest morning of January. Gabe took Miles to school early so she could leave without the crush of traffic. On the sidewalk, her breath fogged as she fussed with a scarf. "You'll be great," Gabe said. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Say something less cliché. You'll be great. And if they don't see it, that's on their hiring rubric, not on you." She smiled into her scarf. "Better." At pickup, she came out of the building with that particular bounce of a person containing good news. Miles barreled across the snow. "Mom got the job," he shouted before she could. Rachel laughed and threw her arms around both of them at once, a bundle of wool and breath and surprise. They celebrated with hot chocolate at a diner that smelled like grease and childhood. Miles drew a flow chart on a napkin. "Mom, new job rules?" Rachel peered. Rule 1. I will not use my walkie-talkie voice at home. Gabe raised a brow. "You have a walkie-talkie voice?" She used it to order another round of whipped cream. The glow lasted 3 days, until the letter from the court arrived announcing dates for a more formal hearing about long-term arrangements. The guardian ad litem's report had been kind but clear. They should formalize a plan that gave both kids access to both families in ways that safeguarded their sense of who they were. 4. "What does that even look like?" Gabe asked at the dining table that doubled as war room. Calendars sprawled, highlighters open. "Like a train schedule," Neil said. "Too many stops, just enough time to make the transfer." Priya drew boxes, bi-weekly dinners, alternating Saturdays. We picked 2 holidays each to host and spend the other 2 together. Summer, 1 shared week of day camp, and 1 long weekend trip where we all go, so no one feels like a visitor. Rachel added, standing Sunday Zoom with both sets of grandparents. "The kids get to hang up when they're done. We don't make them perform." They took the plan to the judge, who adjusted a comma and gave them a look Gabe recognized from every good teacher. "I can't make you be decent, but I can lay out the conditions under which decency gets easier." The court entered an order that resembled a family recipe card: ingredients, timing, notes for next time. "Warm and not weird," the judge added dryly, and banged the gavel once for luck. The first crisis of the new plan arrived on a Thursday in February. Asha complained of stomach pain at school. By 3 o'clock she was pale and feverish. Priya texted Rachel from the nurse's office. "Going to Lurie Children's. Looks like appendicitis. Can you pick up Miles?" The rest was a blur. Gabe grabbing a go bag, Neil driving too fast, Priya on the phone with insurance, Rachel texting babysitters, Miles chattering to fill the cliff of fear. At the hospital, the check-in clerk said, "Parents?" with eyes on the forms. Priya raised her hand, then glanced at Gabe and Rachel. There was a beat of silence. Gabe stepped forward. "Both," he said. "All of us." The clerk looked relieved. "Okay, we'll put you all on the list." A surgeon explained things in calm nouns and verbs. Asha's appendix had decided to audition for drama club. They'd go in laparoscopically. It was routine until it wasn't. Consent forms appeared. Priya's hand shook on the pen. Neil pressed his knuckles to his eyes and then laughed at himself. "I am not helpful right now." "You're here," Gabe said. "Start there." They waited in chairs designed by people who had never waited. Rachel bought bad coffee. Miles sat on the floor with a paperback, reading out loud to keep the room full. Gabe watched the second hand on the wall clock and thought of every choice he had not been offered, and every choice he had been, and how little the universe cared about fairness when there was a child on a gurney down the hall. When the surgeon came back with a tired smile, all 4 adults exhaled like they'd practiced. "She's okay." Tiny incision, textbook stubborn appendix. "She'll be uncomfortable. She'll be fine." Asha was groggy and outraged by the idea of missing recess for a week. "Do I get points?" she asked hoarsely. "For having an organ removed?" "Big points," Gabe said, and Priya's eyebrows went up at the sweetness in his voice that surprised none of them anymore. At home, Miles made her a card labeled Asha Vyas, Appendix, Victory. Neil wept into a dish towel making khichdi. Priya texted a photo of Asha asleep under an Afghan, a dinosaur tucked under her arm. Rachel wrote back a list of movies and books that featured heroes who had to rest before they could quest. The crisis left a residue of gratitude that stuck to everything for weeks. Spring thinned winter like paint. On Easter, Gabe's mother hosted a brunch big enough to feed a precinct. She set an extra table for the Patels without comment and passed Asha the good orange juice like she'd known her since birth. Later, she pulled Gabe into the pantry and pressed Tupperware into his hands. "Are you okay?" she asked. And the question was a net so soft he almost fell through it. "I'm still mad sometimes," he said. At Rachel. At the clinic. At life for being indifferent. His mother nodded. "Get mad. Then put a plate in front of a child. The world won't apologize, but it will let you feed people," he snorted. "That your theology now?" "It's kept me useful," she said. "Also get a better rug. Working on it." June brought something new. A road trip. Gabe's father, retired and restless in Milwaukee, had been asking gently for months to meet Asha. "If you bring her up," he'd said, "I'll make pancakes like I did for you when you had skinned knees and big plans." They went on a Saturday, all four of them. Gabe and Miles in the front, Asha and Rachel in the back with snacks. The sky was an uncomplicated blue that made you think of promises. At a greasy spoon off I-94, Miles and Asha argued about which state had the best flag. Rachel fed quarters to a claw machine until she won a plush sloth through stubbornness alone. Gabe sent a photo to Priya, and Neil captioned our contribution to science. In Milwaukee, Gabe's father pulled them into a hug with arms like the Midwest. He made pancakes so golden they looked congratulated. "This is Asha," Gabe said, suddenly shy. "I can tell," his father said, eyes kind. "She looks like trouble in the useful way." He crouched to eye level. "Welcome to the branch office of our chaos. You want to see the garage where your dad dented the Buick with a wiffle ball?" Asha's grin was all teeth. "Yes, please." They toured the museum of Gabe's childhood, the tree he fell out of and learned discretion, the alley where he scraped his palms and learned friction, the stoop where he kissed Rachel for the first time and learned velocity. That night after the kids crashed, Gabe and his father sat on the back steps with 2 beers and a quiet that had taken years to learn. "You're doing all right," his father said into the dark. "Some days." "Some days is the answer," his father said. "I used to think fatherhood was a map. Turns out it's a weather report." Gabe laughed softly. "You could have told me sooner." "You wouldn't have heard me sooner," his father said. That's the other trick. By late summer, the rhythm they'd fought for had a heartbeat. Then the universe reminded them that progress isn't immunity. A tabloid-style website published a slanted piece about Chicago's baby swap, complete with photos scraped from social media and smug quotes from strangers. Gabe's phone lit up with numbers he didn't recognize. At school drop-off, 2 parents he barely knew whispered within earshot. Rachel found a student reading the article on a school iPad and had to explain internet literacy through a headache. Priya's aunt in New Jersey called to ask if she should pray extra. Neil suggested a joint statement. "Not for them," he said, pacing in his kitchen. "For us. So we have words to point to instead of bleeding in every conversation." They met around Priya's table and wrote it together. A short paragraph that said the kids were loved and safe and not up for public debate, that they were grateful for support and not accepting interviews, that anyone who had questions could redirect that curiosity into a donation to legal aid for families navigating fertility clinics. They signed all their names and pressed publish. The noise shrank. Not enough, but some. Gabe sat on the clubhouse couch after, hands on his knees, and realized the tightness that had lived in his chest since the Eden Hope envelope, like a small, sharp thing he'd swallowed, had dulled. Not gone, but less serrated. He texted Rachel. "You did good today," she replied with a photo of Miles and Asha building a pillow fort and the caption, "Our PR team, October again." The air sharpened. The kids drew up Halloween plans that sounded like a corporate merger. Asha drafted a slide deck titled Joint Costume Strategy. Miles argued for a two-headed monster. In the end, they went as a time-traveling detective duo, which satisfied their need for gadgets and trench coats. After trick-or-treating, Gabe and Rachel sat on the stoop, while the kids traded candy by complicated rules that would have baffled the World Bank. "I love you," Rachel said quietly, like a confession, like a vow she was not asking him to echo. Gabe watched Miles laugh at something Asha said. Watched the porch light halo the smoke of their breath. He didn't say it back. He didn't not say it. He put his hand on hers, felt the old electricity and the new steadiness, and squeezed once. "One more winter," he said. She laughed. "You and your seasons." "It's how I measure promises," he said. "Big ones get years. Right now you get a season. I hope we stack them." The first snow drew lines over the city like someone had decided to sketch it again. On a Saturday morning, Gabe and Neil took the kids to Maggie Daly Park with sleds and thermoses. Priya and Rachel followed with scarves and a bag of clementines. The hill made heroes and tumblers of everyone. At the top, Miles looked out over the ice ribbon and the loop beyond. "Dad," he said, breath clouding, "do you think our family is going to stay like this?" Gabe considered. Snow squeaked under boots. "Like this," he said, "as in with too many scarves and excellent snacks?" Miles snorted. "As in us, all the people. I think it's going to stay like this," Gabe said, "and also become other versions of this we can't see yet. That's what families do when they're trying." Miles nodded, apparently satisfied with metaphysics. "Also," Gabe added, "you're always mine, in case I forgot to say it this morning." "You said it with hot chocolate," Miles said. "I heard you." They went down the hill badly and gloriously. At the bottom, they sprawled in a heap and laughed loud enough to make nearby toddlers approve. A year after the Eden Hope envelope, the court convened for a review hearing. The guardian ad litem stood and reported that both children were thriving in school, that they described their family as big, that they requested more joint pizza nights, and fewer adults whispering. The judge amended the schedule slightly and thanked the families for making her job easy. Outside, on the courthouse steps, a reporter tried to shout a question. Neil looked at Gabe. Gabe looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Priya. They ignored the microphone and hugged in a configuration that would have been impossible 12 months earlier, messy, sincere, almost funny with elbows. "Dinner?" Priya said. "My place. I made a new recipe that might be edible." Gabe looked at Miles, who was doing math with his fingers. "As long as there's ice cream after," Miles announced, "I approve this plan." "You heard the board," Gabe said. The second spring came in with soft fists of rain. The clubhouse got a new rug that did not offend Gabe's mother. Rachel hung a plant in the window and named it Louise. Priya started a parent support group for families navigating fertility mistakes and found that the room filled faster than any of them wanted. Neil taught a workshop on cricket to skeptical fourth graders and converted precisely 2 of them. At school, Asha and Miles won first place at the science fair with a joint project on Pleistocene megafauna and the physics of a perfect baseball throw. Their trifold board was a chaos of charts and cartoons and hand-lettered slogans. "We like facts. We like fun. We like throwing." When the principal announced their names, the gym applauded the kind of applause that knows more of a story than it says. Rachel, who had to hand them the ribbon, almost managed not to cry. Gabe whooped like a man at a ball game. Priya counted the number of photos she could send to far-flung relatives before becoming that aunt. Neil fist bumped 2 children and 3 teachers. That night Miles crawled into Gabe's lap on the couch, lankier than last year, still finding the same fit. "Remember when I asked if I was still your kid?" he said, sudden and soft. "Yeah." Gabe's throat did the ache he had come to accept as part of the new weather. "It was a dumb question," Miles decided, "but I'm glad you answered it anyway." "It wasn't dumb," Gabe said. "It was brave. Brave is asking for a promise when you're scared it won't be given." Miles considered this, then nodded. "I like promises." "Me too," Gabe said. "Especially the kind we keep a day at a time." On a June evening that tasted like tomatoes and lake wind, they all gathered at the Patels for dinner in the backyard. String lights, paper plates, music that wandered between decades. Asha presented the latest episode of her ongoing series, PowerPoints No One Asked For, titled Why Giant Sloths Would Have Been Excellent Little League Coaches. Miles provided sound effects. After dessert, the kids lay on a blanket and pointed out constellations they'd named themselves. The adults sat in lawn chairs and traded stories about supervisors and neighbors, and the strange solace of routines. "Do you ever feel like we're tempting fate by being okay?" Rachel asked quietly. "Not to anyone, and to everyone." Priya tilted her head. "I think fate is indifferent, but community isn't." She nodded toward the blanket. The lights, the pie dish scraped clean. "We built this." Neil raised his plastic cup. "To overbuilding," he said. "To redundancy in the system." Gabe clinked his cup. "To warm and not weird. To more people loving our kids than we'd planned," Priya added. "And to more crumble than strictly necessary," Neil said, because he could not resist. They laughed. The kind of laughter that knew where it had been. When it got late, they herded sleepy children and stacked chairs, and argued about who would take leftovers. On the porch, Rachel squeezed Gabe's hand, not asking, not insisting, just connecting. He squeezed back. The long way home wasn't as long when you weren't walking it alone. On the first day of the 3rd summer, the lake threw a breeze across the city like a blanket. Gabe stood with Miles at the edge of a field chalked fresh. The grass was lumpy and earnest. Asha was there too, sprinting drills and daring anyone to keep up. Priya waved with a thermos. Neil debated yet another dad on whether you could call anything a ballpark without hot dogs. Rachel tucked a clipboard under her arm with the practiced ease of someone who could run a school fire drill with a glance. Miles found Gabe in the bleachers the way he always did, a reflex like breathing, and flashed 2 thumbs up, one for the game, one for everything else. Gabe lifted his hand and waved back, feeling the shape of his life settle. Irregular and bright, and held together with ordinary miracles, bedtime promises, courts that asked good questions, apologies turned into policies, lasagnas, power outages, slide decks about the Pleistocene, a kitchen where streets met. The ball cracked off a bat and skipped wild into the outfield. Miles chased it like he could outrun chance. He scooped and threw to first. The heavens didn't open. The scores didn't etch into stone. The universe didn't explain itself. But the throw was good. Gabe cheered until he was hoarse. He didn't ask the sky for guarantees. He asked for enough. And for that hour on that field, enough was exactly what they had. A year and a half later. The case file on Edenhope gathered dust somewhere behind a row of other catastrophes. The clinic rebranded. The judge retired. The journalist who wrote the worst article apologized in a DM no one needed. The families kept choosing, which is to say they kept waking up. Rachel took the assistant principal job and 6 months in, stopped apologizing for being good at it. She and Gabe didn't rush the word love back into sentences. They let it visit and leave and visit again, until the visits got longer. He didn't move back in. Then one day he did, one bookshelf at a time, because shelves are how you admit permanence. Priya started a small nonprofit that paired families impacted by fertility mistakes with counselors and lawyers who did not charge for reminding people they were human. Neil became treasurer against his will and excelled against his earlier predictions. Asha learned to throw a two-seam fastball that surprised boys twice her size. Miles learned to play second base like a person who knows exactly where the hop will go. On Tuesday nights, they still argued about whether Pluto should have a vote. On Thursday nights, they made nachos in configurations that would alarm nutritionists and delight uncles. Gabe's mother taught both kids to roll out pasta dough. Rachel's father taught them spreadsheets. A neighbor taught them how to hold a hammer without smashing a thumb. The city taught them patience at red lights and generosity at four-way stops. Some mornings Gabe woke before the alarm and lay in the near quiet, the city not yet cleared its throat. He listened to the house, the radiator considering heat, a floorboard remembering every foot that had crossed it, the light finding the plant Rachel named Louise. He listened for Miles's feet in the hall and Asha's voice on a FaceTime call from 2 miles away. He listened for the hum of a life that had not been the one he'd ordered and was better for having been built by many hands. On one such morning, he found a note on the kitchen table in Miles's looping handwriting. Dear Dad, today I am bringing my mitt for recess. If I forget, please text me in all caps. Also, I think we should have pie for dinner. Also, thank you for being my dad when the world got confusing. Love, Miles. P.S. Asha says we need more facts about sloths. Gabe put the note on the fridge with a magnet that said, inelegantly and perfectly, you are here. He packed the mitt and texted in all caps at 11:21 because that was when recess started. He bought a pie on the way home. He Googled giant sloths and learned one new fact. At dinner, he presented all 3. Miles saluted with a fork. Rachel laughed into her napkin. Asha, beaming through the phone, awarded him a gold star. Later, out on the stoop, he watched dusk march down the block, turning the brick to velvet. He thought of every version of himself that had stood on stoops before this one son, boyfriend, husband, lost man in an echoing apartment and felt unafraid of the next versions. He had maps now, and weather reports, and people who would stand beside him when the forecast was wrong. Dad, Miles said behind him, the words still new and eternal. Want to play catch in the dark? Always, Gabe said, and corrected himself out of old habit, out of love. Tonight. They tossed the ball under street lights that buzzed like summer. The leather met the glove with a sound that has always meant home. And when the wind off the lake snuck around the corner and tugged at his sleeves, Gabe tugged back with a grin and stayed.